And it's my privilege to present Jim Rice with the topic, Whatever You Fly, Wherever You Fly, Do It Safely. Jim served as AMA Safety Committee member and chair for 3 years, AMA Executive Council and AVP for District 8 for 14 years, and AMA member since 1956. Jim will present the rules, guidelines, on how to fly safely. And Jim also, this is a good part, served in the U.S. Army for 26 years, retired as a colonel, sir. He owned and operated Second Chance Hobbies for 17 years in San Antonio, Texas. How about a nice AMA welcome for Jim Rice?
Thanks. It's almost like preaching to the choir. I see most of the executive council here. For those of you who don't know me and you were expecting Jim Rice from the Boston Red Sox, I'm sorry. But he doesn't know as much about aviation safety as I do, so you got a little advantage there. I'm going to try to talk today. I think the lead-in may have been a little misleading. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is directed at personal safety when you're on the flying field or building, club safety and what a club safety officer should be doing or thinking about, and then finally national, what we do today and how we act and fly today can really affect what we're able to do in the future on a national level. So I think this opening line kind of tells it all for us, that no matter where you are, what you fly, or who you are, and in fact whether you're AMA or not, your next flight might affect the future of modeling. You know, if a guy in Roswell, New Mexico, takes off with an airplane in the middle of no place, but is able to find a full-scale airplane and bring it down, it's going to affect somebody in New York City. So I think if you're a modeler, AMA or not, you're a safety officer. You got to be safety in your own operation, and you got to be looking at what other people around you are doing to make sure that things are going safely. So I'm going to start out first by talking about personal safety. I was on the board of directors for the EC for a while, and I didn't take seriously the fact that I was out in the sun all the time. And as I retired, I had cancer on my face and had to have half of my face cut off and removed just because I wasn't taking my own personal safety. So safety is more than just how you fly your airplane, but it's how you assemble your airplane, how you respond to people at the field. We had a rattlesnake hit somebody at our field one day. You got to be aware of the situation around you. So I'm going to talk just a little bit, maybe at length, more than you would have expected, on personal safety. My father, when he retired from working, he started building model airplanes about 15 hours a day. And he didn't think about the chemicals that he was around, that he was only around for short periods of time before he retired. And suddenly he was building with cyanide glue, CA glue, for many hours a day. And one day he was walking across the living room and he just passed out. When we got him to the doctors went in and tried to examine him, and the symptoms were that he had COPD. But when they got in and they scraped the inside of his lungs, the insides of his lungs were coated with cyanoacrylate. And the kicker for CA glue is the moisture and humidity in the air, and it had solidified in his lungs. So unlike a smoker, if you quit smoking for a long enough period of time, your lungs will clear up. But that stuff was in his lungs when he finally did pass away. So you need to think about how you're doing things you do. And in his case, we put a fan in his workshop so it would blow. He wasn't going to quit building. I mean, it was almost like a solid smoker. He was not going to stop building. So we put a fan behind his back so it would take that chemical smell away from him. I think there are about 1,000 things that'll kill a model aircraft, and I have 750 of them covered. Every now and then something sneaks up and bounces me onto the ground, and I try to find out exactly what the cause of that was. I try to do a post-mortem on the wreckage and decide what the problem was, even if it wasn't my airplane. If I'm at the field and somebody else has an incident with the earth, I try to go over and help them figure out what it was so I can add to my 750 items that I have covered, so maybe we'll have 751. The first thing you got to do is be introspective. Was it my fault? Did I crash it? Was my dumb thumbs that did this? And some people just can't be honest with themselves or with other people, and it was obviously it came unbound, or the sun went behind a cloud or something. There's always an excuse that you can come up with. So if you can't be honest about whether it was you or something else, you're not going to really have a good post-mortem on this crash. But if you determine that it was actually not your fault, then you need to start looking at airframe and other things. If you determine that it was your fault, maybe the best way to fix that is to go to a simulator, get a similar airplane, put yourself in the same situation, and repeat this incident until you can recover from it properly. It may mean starting at a high altitude. It may mean quit doing that maneuver. But if you can't come up with a solution to keep yourself from being in that bind, then you're going to have to come up with something else. In the case of a problem with the aircraft, you need to pick up as many pieces as you can. Try to find out, did something come unplugged? Did a battery burn out? Did a switch quit operating? Did a push rod fail? But have several people go through it with you to make sure that you know what created the incident so that you can head it off in the future, and then share that information with your flying friends or your other club members. But I had an Air Force officer tell me one time that we all use routines in aviation. We use it in a lot of other things, but all aviators, whether it's full scale or modelers, we have routines. And you can tell when an incident's about to occur when a routine breaks down. And let me just give you an example. If you're at a flying site and you hear somebody say, dead stick, everybody stops what they're doing and turns their eyes to see who it is and where the airplane is. You know the guy is not in a position he wanted to be in, or he wouldn't have declared emergency of dead stick. So we all know that person is now out of their routine. We'll keep our eyes focused on what's going on there until the airplane is obviously under control, going to make the field. Then we'll go back to whatever rat killing we had going on to begin with, because that guy is through with the issues that he had. So routines are important. We need to have routines that keep us from making silly mistakes. And then we need to know when a routine is being violated by us. I had a friend who was flying a pattern contest over near Houston, and he was leading the contest after the first day with a new airplane. The second day, as he's putting the airplane together, a crowd gathered around him wanting to know about the airplane and the weight and how he built it, and just a million questions that you would expect for a guy that was leading the contest. Well, as he's trying to finish putting the airplane together, answer the questions, they called his name. It's time to go to the flight line, and you're on a clock when you go to the flight line. So he's now trying to get the airplane to the flight line, make sure the batteries are in it. It was an electric airplane. And so he's rushed. He gets out there, and he was totally out of his routine. He took off, broke ground, started to climb out, gave it aileron, and it did not turn. That's when he said, I have trouble. He declared an emergency. He got it back on the ground, but not safely. But it was safely away from the people that might have been endangered. And in his accident investigation, he discovered that he'd pushed the wings on the tubes, put the wires in there, but never connected the aileron servos. So he was out of his routine, and I've talked to him about it since then, if he had just stepped back for a second, if he'd had a moment to do that, said, I was out of my routine, I didn't get to do the things that I'm accustomed to doing, he would have gone back through and checked all of those things, including, are the plugs plugged properly? But they were not. He still won the contest anyway, but that's a routine is something that will keep us from having troubles if you realize and recognize that you're breaking that routine. I think that when I go to a new field, one of my routines is before I start to fly, I look at the field. I try to decide, where are troubles? Are there trees on the far side? Are there high lines? Where is the pits? and then go through a dilemma in my mind. If the engine dead sticks on takeoff, or I have a difficulty, which way is safe? Is going to the right safe? Is going to the left safe? So that I have at least given some thought to what I'm going to do in the case of an emergency. I flew drones for the Army for a while. Yeah, I used the word drones, I'm sorry. But it was legitimately a drone. We flew it outside the visual line of sight. And I was at Fort Hood, and it was the first time I'd been there. And we were going to do a night flight. So my first flight at Fort Hood was at night. So I went in the daylight, and I looked, because we had to belly the airplane in, and I looked at where we were, got up on some high ground, and looked at how I was going to land, and discovered a tree that was kind of in play. That evening, when we started flying about 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, I flew my flight, and I came in and landed. And one of the more experienced pilots, I was the junior pilot on the team. I was 65 years old, but I was junior pilot on the team. He had not gone out and done this kind of a routine of checking the field out. And when it was time for him to land, he came right through the tree. Well, it stopped him. He didn't get through the tree, and he damaged a very expensive 13.5-foot wingspan drone for the Army. So, I had a routine. I followed the routine, and I was able to get the airplane squeezed in between the trees and the pits area that we had without any trouble. He did it fine after that when he realized the tree was out there, but you couldn't see it in the darkness. I have a personal routine that I go through, and I've taught, I have no idea how many people to fly. As he mentioned in the lead-in, I owned a hobby shop for 15 years, but I've been teaching people to fly model airplanes since about 1960. So I've had a lot of people that I was handing the transmitter back and forth, a lot of people that I have buddy boxed, and I want them all to have a routine that they get into. So I've drilled this into people, and I told them, I want you to wake up in the middle of the night with this acronym jumping out of your mouth and out of your head, so that you don't make these mistakes. So my routine is CAWT, C-A-W-T-T. I was in the Army, so we can't spell CAWT properly, but I call it CAWT. Don't get caught taken off without going through your routine. And my routine is CAWT, C for controls, and it's not just do they wiggle, but does left aileron give me left aileron? Does right aileron give me right aileron? Is up and down, and do I need to have my dual rates in a specific place? Do I want my flaps in a certain position before I take off? I go through every function on the transmitter that I have working that day. So that's the C part of CAWT. And it doesn't take as long to do it as it took me to just describe it to you. The next one used to be significant for me because it was antenna. On 72 megahertz, you had to extend the antenna. Still, occasionally I run into people on the field who will hand me a transmitter that's 72 megahertz. So I leave it in my routine, but I fly in Texas, and we have fire ants pretty bad. So I've added to the A both antenna and ants. So I reach up and I make sure that my antenna is pointed at a 45-degree angle on the 2.4, but I also look where I'm going to stand to make sure I'm not standing in ants, because that can cause you a problem as well. Then it's WTT. Remember, it's CAWT, C-A-W-T-T. The next one is wind. I just want to make sure before I take off that I'm taking off into the wind. The next one is traffic. We don't have air traffic controllers, so you have to clear yourself with other traffic. So I make the students, before they start to taxi, get a thumbs up or an affirmative from any other pilot on the field. Yes, you're clear to take the runway. Because you don't want to be taking the runway as that guy who didn't check for ants is now dancing around, and you're in the middle of his runway, and your airplane unfortunately flips over, and now he's got a more serious problem. And the final thing is time. It's even more critical now to have time, because we have batteries that tell us how long we can fly, and we pretty much have an idea of when we take off, I'm going to be able to get a 7.5-minute flight or an 11-minute flight or whatever, so you can set your timer to do that. But if you'll make sure that you set the timer, and my son is terrible about this, he takes off and then says, "Dad, I forgot to set the timer." So now I'm looking at my watch for him. But so he's, I guess, one of my worst students. But I have that routine, and I would encourage you to develop, if you don't have a routine, that you give to everyone around you. one of my students came out to fly one time, and I knew he knew the routine, but I watched him, and he was a fairly new pilot at that point. He stepped up to the runway, and he's going through the checklist, and I didn't see the antenna come up. It's when we were on 72 megahertz. And he messed around a little bit more, and I thought he is out of his routine, because by now he'd be taxiing. So I started out to help him because I knew his routine was messed up. And about that time, he went back through the CAWTT, and he pulled the antenna out. And so I patted myself on the back for having taught him that he needs to make sure everything's ready before he takes off. He then took off and did a good flight. And a final thing is an example for you. My son was flying an airplane one day, and it was an old transmitter, and the stick came out of the gimbal. And he yelled, "Dad, I don't find my stick." And I thought he was flying an ugly stick. I didn't know what that meant. So I went running out to him, and by that point the airplane augered in, and I realized he was talking about the transmitter stick was not in the transmitter, and he couldn't control the elevator and the aileron. So I thought about that. I went in the hobby shop that afternoon, and I took the stick out of the gimbal on the simulator. Remember I talked about using a simulator? And I flew entire flights with my thumb down in the gimbal, and flew the airplane around from takeoff to landing like that, in case that ever happened again. Well, sure enough, we bought an airplane in a swap meet 2 or 3 years later, went out to fly it, and the gimbal came out. He said, "Dad, I've lost my stick." And I just said, "Give me the transmitter." I took it, I brought the airplane around, and I landed it. And it was smooth. And then I apologized to him. He was about 34 at the time. I apologized to him, and I said, "The airplane was high enough. I could have told you how to do it. I should have let you land the airplane." And he said, "Dad, I've been handing you a transmitter since I was 2. I had no problem doing that." Well, that leads into my next point is, if you're having a problem, don't be too proud to ask someone else to help you. If you get into a situation where you're unsure, or you see someone who's unsure, and you're more experienced, go offer the assistance, because it's far more important to save the airplane than save the pride, or to save flying into somebody or someone's property or someone's car, or my dog who goes to field with me, than to say, "I think I can do this," and then you really can't. So those are kind of examples of having a routine. I didn't really have a routine for flying without a stick, but I developed one after I saw that issue. As I told you, every time I can find another one of those 1,000 things that I can fix, I try to put it into my bag of tricks. And fortunately that time it worked. Now, still on personal safety, the building or assembly of the airplane, the person who designed it, if you're not designing your own airplane, they've gone through a lot of the school of hard knocks for you. They've determined what the center of gravity ought to be. They've determined what the strength of the servos ought to be. So you should probably follow their guidelines and try to stay within that. If you want to change something, change the shape of the vertical or the rudder, or change the paint scheme. But until you're a really seasoned and experienced pilot, you probably ought to leave those more critical aerodynamic things alone. I think probably most of you have heard the old saying that a nose-heavy airplane flies funky and a tail-heavy airplane flies once. Well, if you make sure that you're flying within the parameters established by the person who designed the airplane, then you'll probably have more success and be less prone to disaster. I had a friend who handed me an airplane to test fly one day, had a G62 on it, and when I got it, it was climbing out really nice, and when I touched down elevator, it pitched over. And when I touched up elevator, it pitched back up, and it was so tail heavy it was uncontrollable. And I was, like a good pilot, trying to save the airplane, but it was headed towards some quarter horses that the lady trained in the field next to us. And finally I said, I can't save it, and I'm not going to hurt the quarter horses. I'm going to crash your airplane. And he had a $2,500 paint job on it, so you can imagine what the airplane was. And I put the airplane in the ground on purpose because I could not safely control it. He went back and did some calculations and discovered that the airplane was 3 pounds tail heavy. That's why I was having a hard time with it. But discretion was a better part of valor there. I did not want to. We would have lost the flying field because it was the flying field owner's wife's horses. It was better to lose the airplane than to do that. Okay, I want to talk about club safety, and this is to me maybe the more important for this crowd. National safety belongs to most of these guys in the blue shirts over here, but club safety, we're required. If you have a club, we're required to have a safety officer, and that safety officer is required to have an email account. My club voted a guy in to be the safety officer, and then when he went in and looked at safety officer duties, realized I don't have a computer and I'm not going to have one, so we had to go find another safety officer. He would have been good, except the requirement is that you be able to be contacted by email if you're going to be the club safety officer. Then they need to at least have looked through the recommended club field layout recommendation from AMA, and that's also a document that's on the AMA website. If you go to modelaircraft.org into the documents section, you'll find the recommended club field layout, and it is a recommendation. It's not mandated that the club field be laid out like that, except when you're doing certain things like racing. You have to have setback distances, but the field layout is recommendation. But you should try to achieve those setback distances, and if you can't, you can enhance your shortened distance with things like fencing, signs warning, keeping spectators no further than this line, even though there's maybe space in front of them. You don't want to have them out where you can get in trouble. Then there's a document in there that's called Recommended Club Officer Duties. And it's a fairly decent document, but the most extensive duty in there, you take all the club officer duties and combine them, and they're not near as long as the safety officer's duties and responsibilities. So if you're a club officer, if you're a club safety officer or a president of a club and want to make sure that your safety officer has knowledge of what their responsibilities are, you should go to that PDF, PDF document number 920, and make sure that the safety officer knows some of the responsibilities that are not mandated, but that you might want to have them do. For example, the safety officer should do a safety briefing to the club at least once a year. After the new safety code comes out, look and see if there are any changes to it. That safety briefing should also include things like a new document that came out on FPV, or you pick the subject, but if it has to do with safety, the safety officer should review that document and then make sure that everybody in the club understands the provisions of that document. The safety officer should also, while they're trying to figure out what to say in this briefing, recall incidents throughout the year and rehash those, things that went exceptionally well and things that were problems, so that they can share those ideas with the rest of the members of the club to enhance safety. Probably, I'm sorry that many of you in here have seen me fly, because it really takes away the credibility of someone who's talking about safety if you've seen them fly. So what I'm trying to tell you is the safety officer needs to set the example. They need to be the person that everybody else looks to and says, look how they put their airplane together, look at the routine they have when they're preparing to fly, look at how they fly the airplane, that they're aware of safety, that we're aware of how they're directing the potentials of the aircraft. And it's really hard to be an impressive safety officer when you're the most unsafe person on the field. So make sure that that's the case. And your biggest asset, if you're a club safety officer or any kind of a club officer, is to go to the AMA staff. But in this case, your point of contact is Ilona Main. She has been doing this for a long time. She's quite familiar with all of the safety documents that are on the AMA website, and I've provided her name and telephone number up there, and also her email address. Don't hesitate to give her a call, because she will tell you whether an incident you had at the field is something that should be reported, something that she needs to be aware of, something that is likely to result in an insurance claim, and she can tell you how to do that report if necessary. and she's not going to make you feel bad, and she's not going to suddenly put you on the grill. She's there to help us. She's there to help us ensure safety and ensure that we properly report and document the incident. Okay, I want to talk about the national level real quick. I thought I would have more to say about this when I started putting this together, because I thought some of the national issues would be coming to a head, and it seems like they're more falling apart than coming to a head. The thing that we have preached to the FAA since I guess forever, but for the last 5 or 6 years since we've been trying to deal with them on integrating model aviation into the national airspace system, is that we have two key elements in our safety program that keep us safe and keep both people on the ground, which now is an issue for the FAA, and full-scale aircraft safe. And one is that we see and avoid. In every instance, we avoid full-scale aircraft. The full-scale aircraft, man-carrying aircraft, have the right-of-way. And second is that we always maintain visual line of sight. Now, is it possible to avoid visual line of sight? Yes. Then our planes become drones instead of model airplanes in my mind. So model airplane enthusiasts, modelers who fly under the AMA safety code and under the auspices of AMA follow those two credos, if you will, and that's what we have preached to the FAA. And that's what's kept us, I think, for 77 or 78 years as safe as we've been. We've got an enviable safety record. Now, there's a work group that has worked with the FAA for the AMA, and it's headed up by Rich Hansen, who is the Government and Regulatory Affairs Officer for the AMA, and it's made up of a lot of people, but many of them are volunteers. Guys like me that say, I'm interested in this, and I want to make sure that we maintain the ability to fly model airplanes in the future. You would be amazed, I think, if you knew how many hours of professional work has been put into that. For about 4 of those 5 or 6 years, we met every Monday for an hour and a half to 3 hours on a phone call. We've made trips to Washington, D.C. to talk to FAA. We've had FAA out here 3 or 4 times, sitting in meetings with them. I've had them to San Antonio, where Rich and the crew came to San Antonio, and we sat down in a room with them, trying to knock out a program that would be mutually acceptable. We've been so close on several occasions to having what I thought was the perfect plan, and we've seemed to miss tying that last knot. And when Public Law 112-95 was published, the Congress told the FAA how they wanted to deal with or not deal with model aviation. And if you were in a community-based organization, which AMA would be, then you would be able to fly beyond the limitations that they're going to have in their new regulation that's coming out. I thought that put us really on an even keel and put us in line to really integrate safely into the national airspace system and amicably into the national airspace system. Well, last year we got an interpretation of that law by the FAA, which has closed our box down considerably, and the NPRM that we've been looking to what is NPRM? It's left my mind right now. Notification of proposed rulemaking. We've been looking for that to be out for 2.5 or 3 years, and there was really strong indications that it would be out before I gave this talk, so I was going to talk about it, and now it's not out yet. So, and I don't know when it's going to come out, if ever. So I can't go into any details about how that's going to affect us in the future. I can just tell you that right now things are not as smooth as I thought 6 months ago they were, and they're not quite as ironed out as I had hoped that they would be. And that is absolutely no fault of the AMA staff and the work group that's been working. The amount of dedication that was put into that. Some modelers around the United States think of AMA as the insurance company, which couldn't be further from the truth. But if you could see the effort that's put into this over the last 5 years, you wouldn't mind having your dues doubled because of the effort that's gone into it. Is it succeeded? No. But what you can do to help us make sure that we continue on a favorable path is ensure that we continue flying safely. The next flight that someone makes could affect how we're looked at in the eyes of the public. It could affect your use of your local flying field, because the people who provide that land to you, they don't want a bad reputation. They don't want to be associated with adverse publicity. They don't want to have personal liability claims against them. So we need to make sure, each one of you should make sure that you're personally staying within the parameters of the AMA's safety programming. And if you can gently nudge those that are around you, I don't want you to become police officers, but if you can push them in the right direction, we have to make sure that as we face the FAA and anybody else who is endangering our future, that we can hold our heads up, look them straight in the eye, and tell them that we are doing the right things. If you're seeing things that are done improperly, it's not the AMA membership, but the other folks, anybody who's flying unsafe, not just other folks, but anybody who's flying unsafe is endangering the future of our hobby. That's really what I think the gist of my talk today was about, is that it's everybody's business, and our future is in the hands of every person that's going to fly a model aircraft, whether it's a quad, a helicopter, a sailplane, a pattern airplane, a turbine jet. When you go to advance that throttle, you need to have your head on your shoulders and have given some thought as to how you're going to do this. We're going to have to try. I've been flying model airplanes since 1949. I'm not ready to quit just because we're looked at as not being able to fly safely.